We've been doing this for 3 years now. Woo! We're going into our 4th year, which is bananas. But Matt and I have seen a lot in this reading series, and I hope it continues to grow, and I hope to keep seeing y'all here, year after year. That said, I'll go ahead and get to the poetry. I'm going to read a handful of stanzas from an essay that just came out, and then I'm going to read a few poems from my upcoming manuscript, and then a few from the OG. But to introduce this first bit in this essay, so I wrote an essay, creative nonfiction, and I wrote it in stanzas because I'm an insufferable poet. And I was like, this is the best way to write a story. And so I think what you need to know about this piece is I grew up in a small town, northwest Indiana, between 3 steel mills, and so I heard trains just all the time. So I have a fascination with trains, and I take Amtrak every time I can, and this is set on one of those Amtrak train rides. It's 8 a.m. and the train is moving at snail speed, giving enough time to enjoy the passing art gallery of graffiti on bridges and buildings, along with my black burnt coffee from the last train stop. Everything is so worn down, but incredibly present in new spirit. Like the solid frozen mac and cheese people love on this cross-country line. Are these the moments when I am lost in unbalance of tears, to then unwittingly ask to press unhealthy habits onto the universal royal you? By that I mean everyone in my life. Possibly. I do like to be favored, and pity was the only way to receive that from my mother. While I ponder peacefully out the large passenger window, an opposing train flies down the other set of tracks that provides a sort of jump scare. It feels like an abrupt metaphor, just inches away from my face. A head jolt, a quick inhale reflex slides through me. Just a few moments later, when another train hurtles by, my body has no immediate response. I suppose there are many reasons why I want to be loved by all. My religious mother taught me that pleading is a virtue. I learned the reasons to be raised in a Christian cult, sexual assault, having recovered addict parents, possessing cognitive learning issues, sexual assault, fed opiates as a child, toxic romantic relationships, sexual assault, being trapped in the working class, several friends passing away, sexual assault. The list could continue into another day like this train will. When do the reactions cross over from required patience and into unrelenting poison? How does anyone actually process pain? How does the royal you process pain without others? How do the royal we not make our pain into their pain as well? Our train races by a walking trail, where 2 mothers with their 2 strollers and 2 toddlers are furiously waving to us as we scream through on visibly rusted rails. This is a core memory for most. This is where it starts. I read that at Dada the other night, and someone said, the host said, something about being a better ancestor, or how do we want to be better ancestors? And I thought that was a really interesting take on that. So, something to think about. I'm going to read 3 poems from my upcoming manuscript. What you need to know about it, it started off as a journal I was keeping during lockdown time, so it's just a fever dream of pandemic, and I thought, you know what would be great? We should start a romantic relationship right now. That sounds like a great idea. And of course it crashed and burned very quickly. But I learned a lot and what it means to be connected. What does it mean to be connected in this highly technological state we find ourselves in? Do something. Make yourself happy. Sunflower field. Take a picture of your wife's back as she photographs seeds that will fall to the ground soon. Deep in lockdown. Couched conversation. Finger soft folds. Establish cravings. Cream-filled confections. Give instructions. Check availability of edible fixings. Time to turn on sense of vibration. Wait. As evening juices squeeze, sound exits device. Predict to take pics. What angles being the most mouth-watering pleasure? Now, turn off the hand mixer. This one's called Blunder of the Box Instructions. That feeling your face feels after crying in your sleep lasts. Box brownies with extra cinnamon and cayenne pepper and chocolate chips baked without sodium. Add anger. How many ways can I say stop speaking because I miss her? So I'll just read 2 more from this book. It's a re-release that I had on my original book because I can't ever stop editing my stuff, apparently. So I'll read a longer one and then a super short one. And this long piece, I'm so sorry y'all have heard this story so many times. I'm pretty sure Matt was there for it. So I was in this workshop with Nicole Seeley, and she gave us the prompt of a praise poem, and I thought I had it in the bag. I did that thing where you write it down and you put it away and you come back. And when I came back and looked at it, I was like, oh shit, I'm a bummer. This is not a praise poem. And all my classmates were very gracious and told me to keep working at it, and now it's a poem I read at every single reading. It's near and dear to my heart, and it's called I Live. I've lived with ghosts, cockroaches, and raccoons. I've lived with calico cats, dirty dogs, and an orange rabbit. I've lived with metropolitan mice, rural rats, and a possum. I've lived with substance shame, sex regret, and family guilt. I've lived with half family, step family, and chosen family. I've lived with parents having hepatitis C, cancer, and depression. I've lived with a boyfriend, husband, and myself. I've lived with translated Bibles, botched brochures, and bullets. I've lived with occult Catholicism and paganism. I've lived with broken nails, fevers, and souls. I've lived with virtuous monsters, powerful misfits, and damned angels. I've lived with gin, vodka, and Vicodin. I've lived with alcoholics, drug addicts, and myself. I've lived with DUIs, IUDs, and EODs. I've lived with migraines, stomach ulcers, and sobriety. I've lived with a rape, break-in, and a shattered kitchen window. I've lived with punches, slaps, and a bite. I've lived with frozen pipes, hearts, and beds. I've lived with abuse, manipulation, and manifestation. I've lived with being fought over, fucked with, and forgotten. I've lived with passion, persistence, and piss. I've lived with devastation, underestimation, and exhilaration. I've lived with ancestors of colonizers, the colonized, and the lost. I've lived with green card citizens and those undocumented. I've lived with sand dunes, bright lights, and suburban flights. I've lived with self-harm, self-awareness, and self-care. I've lived with couples therapy, group therapy, and medication. I've lived with hypersexuality, bisexuality, and prized virginity. I've lived with homeschool, public school, and dropping out. I've lived with beige carpet, linoleum, and presswood walls. I've lived with a broken down car, station wagon, and pickup truck. I've lived with no money, less money, and sometimes money. I've lived with patches of strawberries, clover, and rosemary. I've lived. I have lived. I have lived. I live. And I'm going to close with this one. It's an after poem from Tim DeLugos' Allentown. Tim DeLugos is a poet that I hold near and dear to my heart. Again, these folks have heard me just rattle on and on about DeLugos. But he was this amazing queer poet that he also was very strongly connected to his faith, and so he spoke a lot about that in his poetry. And we lost him in the AIDS crisis in 1990, and I read his book every single year on my birthday. And so he wrote this one about Allentown, called Allentown, and this is a direct conversation to his piece, and it's called Indianapolis. We have some Indianapolis folks here, so I think it's fitting to end on that tonight. Indianapolis, after Tim DeLugos' Allentown. Sleeping too, sunshine and still being stoned and trying to stay celibate before sundown comes. Thank you.